The memorial floated in the exact coordinates where the Defiant Hope had made its final stand. A fusion of human and alien design that somehow captured the aesthetic sensibilities of 7 different species while remaining uniquely beautiful, all in its own right. All flowing curves and sharp angles mixed together in ways that shouldn't work but did, because the designers had learned that combining contradictions often produced something greater than either component along Commander Marcus. Chen's name was carved first on a list that contained 10,000 other names. Human, and Krell, and Zephyrini, and Thorn, and Sylvan, and species that most council members had barely heard of before the war. United now in death, if not always in life, Fulshiner stood before the memorial with Ambassador Vasquez, who'd been promoted to High Arbiter in recognition of humanity's sacrifice. And he tried to find words adequate to honor the dead, but kept coming back to the simple truth that they'd saved everyone and deserved better than speeches we feared humanity. Because you were different, he said finally. Speaking to the assembled crowd of survivors from a dozen species, we saw your violence and your unpredictability and your refusal to accept limits, and we decided you were dangerous. And we were right. You are dangerous, he paused and looked at the names carved in memorial stone, but we were wrong about what that meant. Because your danger comes not from malice but from hope. From the belief that tomorrow can be better than today if you're willing to fight for it. From the stubborn insistence that impossible just means nobody's succeeded yet. The crowd was silent except for the soft sounds of multiple species breathing in different atmospheric requirements. Commander Chen and everyone who died in this battle taught us something we'd forgotten. Velshoner continued. That survival requires sacrifice. That safety requires risk. That peace requires the willingness to fight for it. We'd grown comfortable and called it civilization, when really we'd just stopped trying. He turned to face Ambassador Vasquez, who stood at attention in a formal suit that somehow made her look more human rather than less. Emphasizing the differences instead of hiding them high, Arbiter Vasquez will now present the new council doctrine, he said. Stepping back, Vasquez moved to the podium with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years watching and learning before finally being allowed to participate. The Chen Doctrine, she began, named for the commander who exemplified its principles, states that council military forces will prioritize adaptability over perfection, acceptable losses over zero casualties, rapid innovation over careful refinement. She pulled up tactical displays showing the new training programs where council officers learned human-style warfare, practicing for worst-case scenarios instead of optimal conditions. Accepting that failure was a learning opportunity rather than a career-ending disaster, more importantly, she continued, the Chen Doctrine recognizes that different species have different strengths and that real cooperation means using those strengths in combination rather than isolation. Humans will never be as patient as the Sylvan, or as logical as the Krell, or as strong as the Thorn. But we don't need to be because we have you as partners. The shift in pronoun wasn't accidental and everyone noticed we're not separate civilizations anymore, Vasquez said. We're one galactic community, with shared goals and shared responsibilities. And that means when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we face it together, she gestured to the memorial. These people died fighting for species they'd never met, protecting worlds they'd never visited, because they understood that the galaxy is bigger than any one civilization and survival means everyone survives, or no one does. The reconstruction efforts showed what that philosophy meant in practice, with human engineers working alongside Krell technicians to rebuild damaged stations, Sylvan medical personnel treating human casualties with the same care they'd give their own species, Thorn construction crews following human architectural designs without the usual complaints about efficiency versus aesthetics on Earth. The first Krell embassy opened in Beijing, and Ambassador Velshoner Jr., named for his uncle who'd become something of a legend among humans, presented his credentials to a president who greeted him with the traditional handshake and a smile that held genuine warmth. Welcome home, President Martinez said. And meant it. Meanwhile, in council space, human colonies were finally being established beyond the old quarantine boundary, spreading out into systems that had been empty for millennia because council species preferred clustering around established centers. And wherever humans went, they brought their particular brand of chaos that mixed innovation with tradition in ways that continued to confuse. Alien observers. Zephyrini anthropologists studying human expansion patterns noted that humans terraform planets not to make them Earth-like, but to make them livable while preserving their unique characteristics. Creating ice worlds with underground cities and desert planets with massive biodomes and ocean worlds with floating arcologies. Adapting to environments instead of forcing environments to adapt to them, they're backwards, the anthropologist wrote. Every other species in the galaxy shapes their environment to match their biology. But humans shape their society to match their environment. It's inefficient and chaotic, and somehow it works better than our approach. The cultural exchange programs showed similar patterns with human students learning Krell mathematics and logic while teaching improvisation and creative problem-solving, with alien musicians incorporating human instruments into traditional compositions and vice versa, with restaurants serving fusion cuisine that mixed the culinary traditions of 5 species in dishes that shouldn't taste good but somehow did. Dear Sarah Okonkwo received the Council Medal of Scientific Achievement for her work on the harvester virus, but spent her acceptance speech talking about the 11 researchers from 6 species who'd contributed to the breakthrough, refusing to take sole credit in a way that made council scientists uncomfortable because individual recognition was supposed to be the highest honor. Science is cooperation, she said simply. Pretending otherwise just slows everyone down. Then came the discovery that changed everything again. While analyzing the Reaper's remains looking for salvageable technology, a Sylvan researcher found data cores containing star maps, showing the paths of dozens of other harvesters scattered across the galaxy, all launched millions of years ago by the same extinct civilization, all following pre-programmed routes that would eventually bring them into contact with Council Space. The emergency session convened within hours, with every council member present, including the newest members from species that had been uplifted during the reconstruction period. How many? Asked Velshoner. Staring at the projected trajectories, at least 40 that we can identify, reported the lead researcher. Possibly hundreds more beyond our current scanning range. The chamber erupted in panic before Vasquez's voice cut through the chaos. Good, she said, and everyone stopped to stare at her. Good, she repeated, because now we have time to prepare. We know they're coming. We know how to fight them. And we have the industrial capacity of the entire council, plus humanity working together. She pulled up production figures showing the combined output of human and council shipyards. Research programs developing new weapons based on lessons learned from the first Reaper. Training facilities graduating officers who understood both human and council doctrine. The first Reaper almost killed us because we were unprepared and divided, Vasquez said. The next one faces a galaxy that's united and ready. And the one after that faces a galaxy that's had even more time to prepare. She smiled, and it was the smile that Velshoner had learned meant. Humanity was about to do something ambitious. By the time the last harvester arrives, we'll be waiting with enough firepower to crack planets. And more importantly, we'll be waiting together, Counselor. Zephyrim, who'd opposed human integration from the beginning, stood slowly, her crystalline form pulsing colors that indicated contemplation. I was wrong, she said quietly. About humans, about isolation, about safety through separation. Commander Chen and everyone who died proved that different doesn't mean dangerous. It means capable in ways we're not. She turned to Vasquez. I spent 3 centuries arguing that humanity should remain quarantined for the galaxy's safety. I'd like to spend the next 3 centuries proving that integration was the right choice. The vote to establish Joint Human Council Rapid Response Fleets passed unanimously 5 years later. Velshoner stood in the council chamber, watching the view screens show the second Reaper approaching council space. But this time, the response was coordinated. From the start, with mixed species crews already in position and weapons designed specifically for Harvester. Combat the engagement lasted 6 days instead of 6 weeks, with casualties under 2% because everyone had learned the lessons that the first battle taught. When it was over, Velshoner sent a message to the memorial where Commander Chen's name still stood first on the list. The Reaper entered council space exactly on schedule, because machines didn't have the imagination required for unpredictability. Appearing at the edge of the outer rim systems like a moon that had somehow learned to move under its own power. Massive and dark and radiating energy signatures that made every sensor array in the sector scream warnings about physics violations. Within 6 hours, it had deployed the first wave of harvester drones, millions of them spreading out like a metallic plague toward anything that contained useful materials. And the Council's forward monitoring stations watched in horror as the drones consumed an entire asteroid belt in the Kepler system, breaking down rock and ice into component atoms and reassembling them into more drones in an exponential growth pattern that would strip the galaxy clean in less than a decade if left unchecked. All forces engage, ordered Fleet Admiral Morrison from the bridge of the human dreadnought Indomitable. And the combined Council human fleet dropped out of faster than light. Travel right in the middle of the drone swarm with weapons already firing. The initial engagement was chaos. In the purest sense, with thousands of ships from 7 different species trying to coordinate attacks while using incompatible targeting systems and communication protocols. And it showed immediately as Zephyrine cruisers nearly fired on Thorn destroyers, while human frigates had to physically dodge Council carriers that were supposed to be providing support. This is not working. Velshanor transmitted from his command ship, watching the tactical display show friendly fire incidents and wasted firing solutions. "We need unified command structure now," agreed, Morrison replied. And she did something that no Council admiral would have considered by immediately. Transferring tactical control of the entire human fleet to Velshanor's ship. "You've got the strategic experience. We've got the tactical flexibility. Use us where we're needed most." It was a gesture of trust that stunned the Council officers because humans were supposed to be the individualistic ones who couldn't submit to authority. But Morrison had just handed over command of 40% of the Allied fleet without hesitation or conditions. Velshan stared at the tactical display for exactly 3 seconds, processing the implications before making decisions that would have required committee approval and normal Council operations. Human destroyers forward screen, Krell cruisers mid-range support, Thorn dreadnoughts, anchor positions. Zephyrine carriers fall back to reserve. Sylvan medical ships protect civilian evacuation routes. The fleet reformed into something resembling actual military formation, and the engagement shifted from chaos to merely catastrophic Council weapons scored hits that should have disabled harvester drones, but the machines just kept coming, repairing damage in real time or simply accepting destruction as acceptable losses while their companions continued the assault. It was like fighting an enemy that didn't understand the concept of retreat or morale they're treating individual. "Units is completely expendable," observed Dr. Sarah Okonkwo from her position aboard the research vessel Newton, where she'd been analyzing harvester technology between drone attack waves. "No self-preservation programming at all, pure goal-oriented behavior." "Which means traditional tactics won't work." Recommendations, Morrison asked. "Dodging debris from a destroyed Council frigate fight like humans," Okonkwo said bluntly. "Accept casualties, take risks, trade losses for strategic gains. Everything the Council has spent millennia trying not to do." The channel went quiet for a moment before Velshanor's voice came through. "Do it," he said. "Human tactics across the board. Commander Chen, you're authorized for asymmetric warfare protocols." Chen's response was immediate and terrifying to anyone who understood what asymmetric warfare meant when humans said it. His squadron of destroyers broke formation and dove straight into the thickest concentration of harvester drones, taking massive damage but drawing the machines into a pursuit pattern that left them vulnerable to ambush from Krell cruisers hiding in the debris field of a shattered moon. Meanwhile, human engineering teams were doing something that made Council officers physically ill, deliberately destroying resource-rich asteroids to deny them to the harvesters. Scorched earth tactics on an astronomical scale that went against every conservation instinct that civilized species had developed. "You're destroying irreplaceable resources," protested a Sylvan logistics officer. "We're destroying enemy ammunition," corrected the human demolition specialist. Every asteroid we crack is 1,000 drones that never get built. The strategy was working, but the cost was brutal, with casualty rates climbing past 10% in the first week of fighting. Numbers that would have ended any Council military operation, but which human commanders accepted as necessary. Their crews kept fighting even when their ships were crippled. Even when retreat would have been the logical choice, Velshner watched a human frigate with main power offline and half its crew dead continue firing with backup batteries until the ammunition ran out. Then deliberately ram a harvester factory ship in a suicide run that took out the entire facility. Why? He asked Morrison. Why do they keep fighting when survival is impossible because giving up ensures failure? She replied calmly. But fighting gives us a chance, even if it's a small one. And humans will take a 1% chance over 0% every single time the battle had been raging for 3 weeks when Dr. Okonkwo made her breakthrough. Analyzing captured harvester, its components and finding the control frequency that connected all drones to the Central Reaper intelligence, it's a virus, she explained during the emergency command briefing. A software package that corrupts the replication instructions. Makes each new generation of drones slightly more defective until the entire system collapses. Deployment method, asked Velshner. Someone has to physically deliver it to the Reaper's core processing center. Okonkwo said quietly, the electromagnetic interference around that thing makes remote transmission impossible. We need a ship to get inside and upload directly. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre suicide mission, Morrison stated flatly. The Reaper's internal defenses will shred any ship that gets that deep. Yes, Okonkwo agreed. I'll do it, said Commander Marcus Chen, before anyone else could volunteer. My stealth ship has the best chance of penetration, and my crew is already briefed on one way. Missions. Velshner wanted to protest. Wanted to find another option. Wanted to be the kind of leader who didn't send people to certain death. But the tactical display showed the Reaper, consuming its 4th star system and spawning harvesters faster than the fleet could destroy them, approved, he said. Hating himself, Chun's ship, the Defiant Hope, launched 6 hours later with the virus loaded, and a crew of volunteers who knew they weren't. Coming back, the approach took 3 days of careful navigation through debris fields and harvester patrols, using every stealth technique humanity had developed during 3 centuries of preparing for war. Against superior forces, the Reaper's superstructure was like a mechanical city the size of a moon. All sharp angles and efficient design with no wasted space. And deep inside, Chen could see the glow of the processing cores where trillions of harvested consciousnesses provided computational power for the machines endless. Expansion, they're trapped in there, he transmitted back to the fleet. Digital ghosts from civilizations that died millions of years ago, powering the machine that killed them. Then free them, Velshner replied. Chen. S ship penetrated the outer layers using gaps in the defensive grid that shouldn't have existed but did, because the Reaper had been built to fight. Civilizations that attacked from outside. Not infiltrators willing to sacrifice themselves, the internal defenses activated when sensors finally detected the intrusion. Energy weapons that could vaporize capital ships, focusing on the tiny Defiant Hope deploying virus now, Chen reported. His voice calm despite alarms screaming throughout the ship, the upload completed just as the first weapons hit. Tearing through the hull and converting matter to energy virus deployed, Chen transmitted. It's working. The Reaper is dying. His last words before the Defiant Hope was consumed were quiet and personal. Earth, the stars are ours now. The Reaper's collapse was visible from 100 light-years away as the virus spread through its systems, corrupting replication instructions and turning the machine's own reproduction against itself. Drones began cannibalizing each other for materials, while factory ships produced defective units that immediately failed within 72 hours. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was reduced to inert metal and fading energy signatures. The fleet gathered around the debris field in formations that mixed human and council ships without distinction. Mourning their dead together, 40% of the human fleet was gone, along with 12% of council forces. Numbers that would haunt Velshner for the rest of his life, but which human commanders accepted as the price of victory. He saved us all, Velshaner said. Looking at the coordinates where the defiant hope had died, he did his duty, Morrison corrected. Just like 10,000 other humans and council personnel who died in this battle, they gave us tomorrow in the wreckage of the Reaper. Salvage teams found the digitized mines still functioning in isolate. The council delegation approached Earth orbit with the kind of tension that came from entering what had been designated enemy territory for 3 centuries. Even though technically humanity had never been enemies, just threats that needed managing. But the defense satellites tracking their every move and the human warships maintaining perfect firing solutions suggested that the distinction didn't mean much to the people who'd been locked in a cage for their entire civilizations. Spacefaring existence, Vel? Shinar stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel watching Earth grow larger in the view screen and trying not to think about the fact that the last time Council ships had come here in force, it had been to enforce the quarantine. With weapons fire and destroyed human colony ships, wondering if humanity remembered and knowing absolutely that they did because humans never forgot anything, especially grudges they're hailing us, reported the communications officer. A young Krell who'd never seen combat and didn't understand yet that sometimes the scariest enemies were the ones who smiled while they beat youth viewscreen. Shifted to show Ambassador Lyra Vasquez, looking exactly like she had during 30 years of council sessions, except now she was sitting in what was clearly a command center, surrounded by military personnel, and her smile had an edge that suggested she was enjoying this reversal. More than was strictly diplomatic welcome to Earth, she said cheerfully. Please proceed to the coordinates we're transmitting. You'll be meeting with our negotiation team in Geneva. Which is ironic since that's where we used to negotiate our own treaties back when we only had each other to fight. The diplomatic vessel landed at the designated coordinates, where a reception committee waited that included military honor guards who stood at perfect attention with weapons that looked disturbingly advanced compared to Council's small arms. Politicians wearing formal attire that somehow made them look more dangerous rather than less. And a crowd of human civilians who'd gathered to watch history happen with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. President Chen Zhongwei greeted Velshaner personally with a handshake that the Krell had learned was a human gesture of goodwill, but which always felt like a threat assessment, given how much information humans could apparently gather from physical contact. Measuring grip strength and skin temperature, probably a dozen other factors that their primate brains processed without conscious thought. Shall we begin? The president said, gesturing toward a building that humans called the Palace of Nations, which seemed pretentious until Velshaner remembered that this species had spent most of their history divided into competing nations, and the fact that they'd unified it all was probably worth celebrating. The negotiation room was designed to accommodate multiple species, which meant it was uncomfortable for everyone equally. A very human approach to fairness that Velshaner was starting to recognize as their default solution to impossible problems. Our terms are simple, Ambassador Vasquez said once everyone was settled, and she projected a document that made several council members hiss in alarm. Full voting membership in the Galactic Council with all associated rights and privileges. Immediate removal of all quarantine restrictions and monitoring stations. Complete sharing of council technology, including jump drive theory and energy weapon specifications. Reparations of 10 trillion credits adjusted for inflation. And a formal apology for 300 years of illegal imprisonment. Illegal, sputtered Counselor Zephyrim, her crystalline form flashing angry red. The quarantine was approved by unanimous council vote and fully compliant with galactic law, guarding dangerous species. Except we never attacked you, Vasquez said calmly. The first contact war started when your ships fired on our colony vessels without warning. We defended ourselves, which is a right recognized under your own laws. And you responded by imprisoning an entire species for the crime of being good at defending themselves. She pulled up historical records that the Council had apparently classified, but which humanity had somehow acquired, showing the initial encounter where a Council patrol had indeed fired first after misinterpreting human defensive posturing as aggressive intent. a mistake that had spiraled into 6 months of warfare because nobody on either side had been willing to back down. You lied, Belshazzar said quietly. Not angry, just disappointed, which was apparently a very human emotion that he'd picked up from 3 centuries of watching Ambassador Vasquez attend council sessions. We simplified, Zephyrim corrected. The full details weren't relevant to the security situation. They're relevant now, Vasquez said. Because we're about to fight alongside you against an extinction threat, and I will not have my people dying to protect civilizations that built their peace on lies about human aggression. The room went silent except for the soft humming of translation devices working overtime to convey emotional nuances across species barriers. What choice do we have? Asked Counselor Mirai, her plant-based neural network processing the political calculations faster than anyone else in the room. You have us over a barrel, as the human saying goes. We need your help, and you know it. Yes, Vasquez agreed. But we also know that alliances built on pure desperation don't last. We need you to want us as partners, not just tolerate us as necessary evils. So here's the real deal. She pulled up new projections, showing human military capabilities that made the Council's intelligence estimates look pathetically optimistic. Fleets of warships that shouldn't exist given the resource constraints of a single solar system. Weapons that violated several Council treaties that humanity had never signed. And most disturbing of all, population figures showing that Earth's system now held 40 billion humans, spread across orbital habitats and terraformed moons. We can save you, Vasquez said bluntly. Our military is designed for exactly this kind of fight. Our tactics are built around fighting superior forces. Our entire strategic doctrine is based on acceptable losses and rapid adaptation. We've spent 300 years preparing for war because we knew eventually someone would come for us, and it might as well be useful practice. She paused, and her expression softened slightly. But we don't want to just save you. We want to join you. Real cooperation, not the fake kind where you pretend to listen while planning to cage us again once the crisis passes. We want a galaxy where humans and Krell and Zephyrini and Thorn and Sylvan and all the rest actually work together instead of just coexisting in careful separation. Pretty speech, Zephyrim said coldly. But words are cheap. What guarantee do we have that once we give you everything you want, you won't simply conquer us anyway? Vasquez smiled, and it was the smile that Belshazzar had learned to fear most. The one that meant a human was about to say something true. You don't, she said. You have to trust us. Just like we're going to have to trust you not to betray us again once the Reaper is dealt with. And I know that terrifies you, because your species evolved on easy worlds where trust was a luxury. But humans evolved on a death world where cooperation meant survival. We learned to trust each other because the alternative was extinction. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking Geneva, where humans moved about their daily lives apparently, unconcerned that alien delegates were deciding the fate of their species. Every human in this city would die to protect their neighbor, she said quietly. Not because they're stupid or suicidal, but because 10,000 generations of evolution taught us that the tribe survives when individuals sacrifice. And our tribe now includes 40 billion people who see themselves as one species. With one future, she turned back to face the council. Delegates, the question is whether your tribes can expand to include us. The vote took 6 hours of debate. But the outcome was never really in doubt because fear was a powerful motivator. And the Reaper was now only 3 months away. Humanity got everything they demanded, and the Council got something they hadn't expected. Human engineers immediately sharing their own innovations in exchange for Council technology. Human doctors offering medical assistance to injured Council personnel. Human teachers volunteering to help with cultural exchange programs. They're not like us, Belshazzar said to Mirai. As they watched human shipyards launch the first wave of joint construction vessels, crewed by mixed species teams. No, the Sylvan counselor agreed. They're better at this cooperation thing than we ever were. Because we cooperate when it's easy, and they cooperate when it's necessary. In orbit, Commander Marcus Chen took command of an integrated human council squadron and began drilling them in tactics that made the alien officers uncomfortable. Practicing for catastrophic failures and worst-case scenarios instead of optimizing. For perfect conditions, you plan like we've already lost. complained a Krellwing commander. That's because we might lose, Chen said calmly. And when you accept that losing is possible, you stop being afraid of it and start planning around it, which is how you turn losses into victories. The Reaper was now 90 days out and closing fast. The simulation played out. For the 15th time in the Council's strategic planning chamber, and for the 15th time the results were catastrophic, with Council fleets being reduced to scrap metal and expanding clouds of superheated plasma within the first week of engagement against the entity they now called the Reaper, because harvest implied something agricultural and peaceful when the reality was mechanical genocide on a scale that made extinction events look like minor setbacks. Shinar watched the tactical display with 3 of his 6 eyes, while the other 3 monitored the reactions of the military commanders who'd been summoned from across Council space to witness their own inadequacy. Seeing proud warriors who'd spent lifetimes mastering the art of civilized warfare come face to face with the fact that civilization was about to end and all their careful strategies meant nothing against an enemy that didn't care about casualties or honor or the elegant dance of matched forces testing each other's resolve. Show them scenario 16, he ordered, and the computers obliged by running the only simulation that had shown even marginal success. A desperate gambit that involved evacuating 90% of Council space and concentrating all military forces into a single choke point defense that might buy enough time for the civilian populations to escape to the galactic rim, where the Reaper hopefully wouldn't follow for another few million years. Unacceptable, growled Admiral Cortona, his massive thorn body radiating heat signatures that indicated extreme agitation. We don't retreat. We don't abandon our worlds. We stand and fight and we die, Valshoner said flatly. Within 30 days, according to every model, our ships are optimized for patrol and peacekeeping operations against pirates and the occasional border dispute. Not total war against an opponent with technology that makes our best weapons look like sharp sticks. He pulled up comparative analysis showing Council military development over the past 1,000 years, and the curve was almost flat. Barely any innovation beyond incremental improvements to existing systems, because when you controlled the galaxy and faced no serious threats, there was no evolutionary pressure to change. No reason to innovate, no desperate need to find an edge over enemies who wanted you dead. Meanwhile, humanity's curve looked like a cliff face going straight up. 300 years of isolation had turned Earth's solar system into a fortress, because humans apparently couldn't stop preparing for war, even when there was no war to fight. Couldn't stop innovating, even when innovation wasn't strictly necessary. Couldn't stop treating every day like it might be their last chance to make something new and interesting before the universe killed them. The intelligence reports showed construction on a scale that defied economic logic, with massive orbital habitats ringing Earth and Mars and the moons of Jupiter, with asteroid mining operations that had consumed entire belts to feed construction programs that never seemed to end, with research facilities where human scientists pursued every crazy idea that occurred to them because failure was just another data point on the path to eventual success. They've been waiting for us, said Counselor Mirai quietly, her plant-based neural network processing implications faster than most silicon computers. 300 years they've known we were watching, known we might come back, and they've spent that entire time preparing for either invasion or liberation, both probably. Valshoner agreed, pulling up intercepts of human military communications that showed dual-purpose planning for scenarios, ranging from Council attacks without warning to Council requests alliance against external threat, with contingencies for everything in between, because humans apparently liked having options. They've reverse-engineered our technology from the ships we left behind after the quarantine enforcement, improved on it in ways our engineers say shouldn't be possible, and built a fleet designed specifically to counter Council doctrine, which is why we should never have contained them in the first place, snapped Zephyrim, her crystalline form pulsing angry red frequencies, and why we definitely shouldn't release them now. You're talking about giving the most dangerous species in the galaxy exactly what they want right when we're at our most vulnerable. I'm talking about survival, Belshazzar said. And he pulled up the archive footage again, the images that haunted his sleep cycles. Human soldiers fighting with a ferocity that terrified him, but also protecting alien civilians with the same intensity. Human engineers crying over failed designs and then trying again with modifications. Human diplomats lying through their teeth about capabilities, while simultaneously offering genuine friendship to anyone who'd accepted their contradictions. He continued. Violent pacifists, logical madmen, individuals who'll die for the collective without hesitation. They shouldn't work as a species, and yet they do. They thrive. They take every setback and turn it into motivation. He paused and looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of civilizations that had forgotten how to struggle. We've grown soft, he said bluntly. Comfortable. Our species reached the stars and decided we'd arrived at the destination when humans see every arrival as just another starting point. We build to preserve when they build to explore. We fear change when they weaponize it. The chamber was silent, except for the soft humming of holographic generators and the subsonic rumbling of Thorn. Respirations, the vote is in 3 cycles, Belshazzar said. I recommend we approve contact with Earth and negotiate for military assistance. The alternative is extinction later in his private quarters. Belshazzar received an encrypted message from Ambassador Lyra Vasquez, the human diplomatic representative who'd spent 30 years attending council sessions, where she was allowed to observe but never speak, never vote, never participate in decisions that affected her entire species. And yet she kept showing up with a smile that Belshazzar had learned to recognize as humanity's favorite weapon. The smile that said, I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed, and I'm going to outlast you. The message was brief. We know about the Reaper. We've known for 2 weeks because apparently your deep space monitoring network has security holes big enough to fly a dreadnought through. Humanity is prepared to assist in defensive operations in exchange for full council membership, immediate removal of quarantine restrictions, complete technology sharing, and reparations for 3 centuries of forced isolation, non-negotiable. You have 48 hours to respond. Belshazzar stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how humans had penetrated council security networks that were supposed to be unbreakable, then remembered that supposed to be meant nothing to a species that treated impossible as a challenge rather than a limit. He drafted a response, accepting all terms, and sent it with his personal encryption key, knowing that half the council would call it treason and the other half would call it pragmatism, and he'd probably be remembered as either the leader who saved civilization or the fool who handed the galaxy to humanity. The way he'd be remembered, which was more than could be said for extinct species. The message he got back was even shorter. Pleasure doing business with you. Our fleet will be ready in 72 hours. Ambassador Vasquez. On Earth, the government broadcast went out on every channel, simultaneously with President Chen Zhangwei addressing not just humanity, but the listening council. Monitors that everyone knew were there for 300 years. You've kept us in a cage, he said calmly, afraid of what we might become, afraid of our violence, our unpredictability, our refusal to accept limitations that you considered natural law. And you were right to be afraid, because humanity doesn't accept cages. We never have. We've spent these centuries building and planning and preparing for the day we'd be free. He paused, and his expression shifted into something that looked like a smile, but had to. Many teeth that day is today. Not because you've chosen to release us, but because you need us. And we're going to help you, because that's what humans do. We help, we build, we protect. Even when you don't deserve it, even when you've wronged us. Because cooperation is how we survived our death world, and it's how we'll survive the galaxy. Another pause while he let that sink in. But understand this. We're not your subordinates anymore. We're not your problem to manage. We're your equals, and after we save your civilizations from this Reaper, you're going to treat us that way. The age of human containment is over. The age of human cooperation begins now. The broadcast ended, and across council space leaders, who'd spent lifetimes maintaining the quarantine, watched helplessly as their carefully constructed Isolation collapsed under the weight of necessity, and Deep Space Commander Marcus Chen's stealth ship intercepted the last council. Courier still carrying classified Reaper data, and he smiled as he broadcast everything to Earth on unencrypted channels for anyone to hear. They're scared, he transmitted. And they should be, but not of us. Not anymore. The great chamber hung in the darkness of space like a jewel of crystal and steel, orbiting the neutral world of Terminus X, where no single species held power and all voices were supposed to be equal. Though everyone knew some voices carried more weight than others in the Galactic Council, the governing body that had maintained peace across 7 civilizations for nearly 2,000 years without major conflict, High Arbiter Belshazzar stood at the center of the circular chamber, his insectoid body perfectly still in the way only the Krell could manage, with compound eyes that could see in spectrums humans would never comprehend, and mandibles that clicked softly as he processed the incoming data streams from every corner of council space, waiting for the other delegates to settle into their positions. Around the great table that wasn't really a table, but a holographic interface that could shift and change to accommodate the wildly different physiologies of the council. Members 300 years ago. Belshazzar had been a junior military analyst when humanity had burst onto the galactic stage with stolen, faster-than-light technology and a cheerful disregard for established protocols, sending out colony ships before anyone had given them permission and generally behaving as if the galaxy belonged to them, simply because they had finally figured out how to leave their home system, which had annoyed the established powers, but hadn't seemed particularly threatening until the military assessments started coming in. Humans were adaptable in ways that defied biological sense, taking to zero gravity like they'd been born for it when their species had evolved under crushing pressure on a death world, where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill them. Learning alien languages in months when most species needed years. Forming bonds with other races so quickly that Krell sociologists suspected some kind of pheromone manipulation. And most disturbing of all, showing a capacity for violence that could switch on and off like a circuit with no apparent transition period. The first contact war had lasted only 6 months, but it had terrified every species that witnessed it because humans didn't fight like civilized beings who understood that warfare was about economic pressure and strategic positioning and careful preservation of resources. No. Humans fought like cornered animals who decided that taking you down with them was an acceptable outcome, using guerrilla tactics and suicide runs and something they called acceptable losses that made Belshazzar's blood run cold, even now, 3 centuries later, so the council had done the only logical thing and quarantined them, establishing a 50 light-year boundary around Earth's solar system and posting fleets at every jump point with orders to destroy any human vessel that attempted to leave. And for 300 years it had worked. Humanity had been contained, growing and developing within their cage but unable to threaten the wider galaxy. Belshazzar had thought it would last forever, or at least until humanity matured enough to join civilized society. But forever had just ended. The holographic display at the chamber's center flickered to life, showing an image that had been captured by deep space monitoring stations at the edge of council territory. Something massive, moving through the void between galaxies where nothing should exist, except ancient radiation and scattered hydrogen atoms. An artificial construct the size of a small moon, decelerating as it entered their galaxy with a trajectory that would bring it right through the heart of council space. How long until it arrives? Asked Counselor Zephyrim of the Zephyrini Collective, her crystalline form refracting the blue light of the hologram into rainbow patterns across the chamber walls for months at current velocity. Belshazzar replied without checking the data, because he'd already memorized every detail of the approaching threat during the 3 sleepless cycles since its discovery. And before you ask, yes, we've attempted communication using every known protocol and several theoretical ones that the linguistics department invented specifically for this. Contact and received no response, except for a single repeating transmission. He triggered the audio feed, and the chamber filled with a sound like mathematics made audible. Pure information compressed into tones that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to the logical centers of the brain. And when the translation algorithms finished parsing it, the message was simple and utterly terrifying. Prepare for harvest. The chamber erupted into chaos as 7 different species tried to talk at once using 7 completely different methods of communication, from the Krell's clicking mandibles to the Zephyrni's light pulse language to the deep subsonic rumbling of the massive thorn, who barely fit in the specially reinforced section of the chamber built to accommodate their bulk. Valshaner let them argue for exactly 90 seconds before triggering the harmonic pulse that meant silence in the name of order and waiting for the chamber to quiet down again. A process that took longer than usual because genuine fear smelled the same across species lines, and every being in this room was absolutely terrified. Military projections, he said flatly. The hologram shifted to show tactical simulations that had been run by the combined strategic computers of all 7 council militaries, working in cooperation. Simulations that all ended the same way, with council fleets being systematically dismantled by weapons technology that was so far beyond their own capabilities that fighting back seemed almost pointless. We lose, said Admiral Cortona of the Thorn Defense Fleet, his massive form shifting uncomfortably. Every simulation, every strategy, every possible deployment of forces results in total defeat within weeks. This thing, whatever it is, has been traveling between galaxies for millions of years, and its technology shows it. Then we evacuate, suggested Counselor Mirai of the Sylvan Consensus, her plant-based biology making her naturally inclined toward survival over confrontation. We have 4 months to move our populations to the outer colonies and wait for this harvester to pass through. It's not passing through, Valshaner said quietly, pulling up the trajectory analysis that showed the object's deceleration pattern. It's stopping right in the middle of council space. And if it's a harvester as we suspect, it will strip every resource-rich system it encounters, which means our entire civilization dies even if we run. The silence that followed was the silence of species confronting their own extinction. There is one option we haven't discussed, Valshaner said slowly, knowing that what he was about to propose would be considered treason by half the council and insanity by the other half. One military force in this region of space that specializes in impossible odds and acceptable losses. One species that has spent 300 years preparing for war while we've enjoyed peace? No, said Zephyrim immediately, her crystalline structure flashing angry red. Absolutely not. We quarantined the humans precisely because we feared what they would become with access to galactic resources and military technology. Releasing them now would be trading one extinction threat for another, would it? Asked Valshaner. And he pulled up archive footage from the First Contact War, showing human soldiers fighting alongside Krell civilians who'd been caught in the crossfire, sharing their rations with alien refugees, crying over enemy dead. Yes, they're violent. Yes, they're unpredictable. Yes, they terrify us. But they're also the only species in known history who've turned a death world into a garden, and then looked at the stars with hope instead of fear. The footage shifted to show human ships performing maneuvers that should have killed everyone aboard, human commanders accepting casualties that would have ended any council military career, human engineers solving problems through trial and error instead of careful calculation, and through it all, humans refusing to surrender even when defeat was certain they survive. Valshaner said simply, it's what they do. It's all they've ever done. And right now, survival is the only thing that matters. The vote was scheduled for the next cycle, but Valshaner already knew how it would go because fear was a powerful motivator, and the council members were finally more afraid of the harvester than they were of humanity in orbit around Earth. Commander Marcus Chen watched the approaching council ships on his stealth vessel's sensors and smiled.